Oh, welcome again in a ZeroS slash JumpScale, I must say today, training session. Thank you very much again for all of you for being here. This, I think, is in general like already the 20th session, but in the new series, it's like the 5th session. So this session is about JumpScale. We'll talk a lot about JumpScale. Before we start, let me remind you about what the context is, where we come from, and where you'll find all other trainings that have been recorded as part of this series. So there you see the link. The link will lead you to an overview of all the sessions. You'll find all the slides over there. Also, each time with the link to or the Zoom recording or the YouTube recording. So we make sure that everything is shared on YouTube for whomever that really wants to go through it on his own face and time. I think the very first session that was given was the one from Christophe, which is the second on the list, is General Architecture. It's, I think, a session that I really recommend to all of you if this is the very first session you attend. And in a way, this session is the first session about JumpScale in this new series. You don't need to know anything upfront in order to start here. We, however, require you some love, to have some love for programming or Python if possible, because you will need it when working with Python or when working with JumpScale. As a prerequisite for this session, it might have been interesting to have watched the Getting Started with ZeroS, because as you will see, we will be leveraging what we learned in the last session. So we will be leveraging the skills you need to set up a ZeroS node, because one of the things we will show you is how to boot a container with the JumpScale sandbox in it from another JumpScale environment. But nevertheless, if you missed that session, the session is available on YouTube. The slides are available on YouTube. All the steps shown during the session are available on the link you see here. And we will make sure that as part of the session of Friday, you'll get introduced again to whatever you need to know about setting up a working ZeroS node, including then with the robot. Okay. Now, what is JumpScale? In one slide, it is a framework. It's basically a framework which was built by our engineers during the last 10 years. Basically, it's a framework where we try to reuse each other's work. When somebody, for instance, already did something specific to Kubernetes, or somebody else did something specific to Docker, we make sure that whatever was done against Docker, like installing Docker, like interacting with Docker, or setting up a Kubernetes cluster, all these things, just a few examples, are things we try to put in the framework. We make available through easy to use Python functions for leveraging by the others in the team and by you, of course. So it's an extensible framework. We also document how to extend it. It's fully open source, as you will see, as it is available on GitHub. And in one word, it's about automation. It's about automating a cloud infrastructure. It's about automating every single component of a cloud infrastructure as you will need it. It provides basically a Python API, so it's really meant for Python programmers or DevOps that want to have one single framework as a Python developer to get things done without the need to learn about every single detail, for instance, about MongoDB, for instance. You can say things like mongodb.install and you don't know what to do and how to install it, but JumpScale knows how to do it for you. You just need to remember mongodb.install. That's the whole idea, and I think you get it. What will be covered today? Basically, these are a little bit the steps and the structure of the slides. First of all, we'll go over JumpScale. We'll go over everything available on GitHub. Then we'll discuss the installation options you have, quite important, of course, because you will most probably after the session, you will want to get started with it and play around with the things you have learned. We'll introduce you to tools, to system abstraction layers. We'll introduce you to prefab. We'll give you some simple demos about all these things that you can use yourself immediately during or after the session. We'll of course talk about a very important component of JumpScale 9.3.0, so the new version, that is the configuration management. It's a very, very powerful component of JumpScale we all love, I must say. And this is the very first time we do a session about JumpScale, talking specifically about the configuration management. Then, of course, most of you will be using JumpScale to interact with backend systems, such as, of course, ZeroOS. And JumpScale provides all kinds of clients, again, easy to use APIs for Python programmers to interact with whatever backend you can come up with. As you will see, this JumpScale client framework, or the factory, goes hand in hand with this new configuration management. So these two really belong to each other and enable nice things like what we will introduce next, the node manager, and things like executors. And it all comes down to the same thing all over and over again. Make it easy for you as a Python programmer to work, to automate whatever you need to automate in a ZeroOS grid. So that's all about. Now, I almost forgot to tell, this is a session that is done by myself, but most importantly by my colleague Riem. Riem is on the screen, as you can see. Riem is the product owner of JumpScale. Riem, I'm sure she dreams about other things too, but a large part of her day is really about JumpScale. She's really the master when it comes to JumpScale, and I'm a lucky guy today because she will be helping us. She will be doing demos, and well, we are all lucky guys today. Let's put it like that. So thank you, Riem, for joining us, and looking forward to the very first demo coming up quite quickly. Then let's get started on GitHub. I'm not going to click the link. You can click it yourself. It's quite straightforward. We have a JumpScale account or a JumpScale organization on GitHub. You'll find a bunch of, I never counted them, but a bunch of libraries, or excuse me, repositories. Here in these two slides, I'll discuss very briefly the most important ones. Some of them that you will find online are not really supported anymore, or not really maintained anymore. Just for now, remember those that are on the slide now are the important ones, are the ones that you will probably be using yourself. The home repository, as the word says it itself, it's basically some kind of repository we created as a home to the JumpScale organization, where we try to put stuff that is common to all other repositories, and of course we need to put roadmap information there, release information, and of course it's open source. Feel free, if you have a question or you find a bug or whatever, and you don't know exactly in which of these to post it, well, feel free to do it in the home repository. We'll make sure that we'll follow up there. The bash repository is not a core repository, but most probably it's the very first one you will be using, because it includes all the tools that we enable, that we make available to make the installation as easy as possible. So that's certainly one of the repositories you will want to use. Core 9, as the word it says, it's the core repository. It's there where the bare framework is being implemented. It's there where everything is implemented that loads all the other modules. The most important components are listed there. It's the config manager, of course, the executors, the node manager, and the JS loader, which is actually this thing that is there to load any other module or any other custom model. You can add, and it's extensible, you can add whatever models you want to, and the JS loader is your friend in that context. lib9, it's an abbreviation for libraries. It extends indeed the core functionality by adding more tools to automate stuff. Some examples, as you can see there, for instance, for interacting with PostgreSQL or Revine or blockchain, or tools to work with RAML, the REST API. It's not markup language, but it's basically the same thing. All kind of, as we will introduce them to you, the system abstraction layers, or sometimes they are called the software abstraction layers. Again, that's the thing through which we will make available interactions with, for instance, typically system level stuff like Docker and Ubuntu, infrastructure level stuff like Ubuntu and other operating systems, or other components like networking stuff and so. It's all being made available through system abstraction layers, again in a way so that you don't have to bother too much about what is needed to set these things up. So it's really made easy. Yeah? Then of course we have prefab. Prefab will be demonstrating it. Well, at least I have a slide on it. You will be seeing us using it quite often, especially in the sessions that will follow. It's really about a set of tools again. It's part of the tools for making server installations easy, for making the configuration of server installations easy. Think about, for instance, whatever, a caddy server. If you want to set up a reverse proxy, just like in my case, I never did set up any reverse proxy. And somehow it took me like 3 minutes to set up a reverse proxy. In this case, a caddy caddy-based reverse proxy. And I didn't have to learn about the installation procedure of caddy or where to put my configuration. Now, indeed, the prefab module for caddy made that quite easy for me. Some of you will know prefab from my previous sessions where I explained how to set up a product that we still use in the field, but that we will discontinue in the next coming months. But setting up AYS, for instance, is also not that easy, let's be honest. But through the prefab module for AYS, it is really easy. Another one that I use a lot myself is, for instance, I set up a virtual machine somewhere, indeed through one of the clients, as I will discuss them later. And then you want to, for instance, put Docker on it. It's just one line and install Docker on it, and immediately you can start creating Docker containers on that VM, and you only wrote 2 lines of code. So that's really wonderful, as you will be seeing. So it's a very powerful component of the framework, as you will see. Then we have Portal 9. It's probably one of the oldest components, also, well, optional components, I must say, as you will see in one of my next slides, that is part of JumpScale. It's basically a wiki engine. It allows you to set up or to create portals quite easily without having to learn all kinds of difficult things. We have our own custom wiki format, which is basically a little bit based on what the guys from Atlassian did introduce. Of course, we have Markdown rendering. We have a full framework for you to create macros and actors, as we call them. Let's call them web services. And basically, many of you know it already without maybe using it. But if you have been working with things like the OpenVCloud Cloud Broker or the end user portal, it is, or the old cockpit, as we used to call it. These are just examples of portals created with the portal framework, or which is available in that repository. So all quite straightforward. So I think these are the modules, or in this case, repositories you will want to learn about. Now, you will see that we work with branches, of course. And this is a quite important point, of course. Let me be very clear about this right away. We here at Gichtech and at Threefold, we most of the time we work with the development branch. That is because the development branch is all about making sure we can release the 9.3.0 version of JumpScale as soon as possible, which means the 9.3.0 is still not yet released. We are still working on it, but we feel very, very confident about the state it has now. And since it's so many people are working on, and we really try to test every single new thing, most of us are on development. So there's certainly nothing wrong to use the development branch, because that's the one most of us are all on. That being said, however, going forward, more and more going forward, of course, we recommend the master branch, because development branch, by definition, as you know, is something that can break from one day to another day, which we don't like, of course, but that's the kind of stuff we don't want to allow for the master branch. So typically we do things in the development branch, and it needs to go through some QA testing, and then it goes into the master branch. That's how it works. And at some point in time, you'll see a real 9.3.0 branch when indeed it is released. That's not yet the case. Riem is working with her team full time on it. So one day we'll hear the news from you, Riem, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, then, well, it's interesting to know, we tend to talk about a core installation and a full installation. A core installation is about, well, the core, that's it. Typically, when we install JumpScale, we install a full environment. And a full environment is basically the core, lib9 and prefab 9. We'll come back to it. Then you have all kinds of plugins. I'm just listing two of them. The Portal 9 is one of them. The AOS 9 is also one of them, but I repeat what I said. I wanted to list it here because most of you know AOS, have been using it. And here you have it in this context. Again, it's an optional plugin that we will discontinue. It will get replaced from a functional perspective by the Zero Robot. And by the way, this Friday, we'll do the first official training session on Zero Robot. We already had a really cool session from Christophe on the Zero Robot. It was rather introductory. It was rather a demo, which you probably liked a lot. Also available on YouTube channel. But together with Christophe, we'll do the very first training session where we really guide you through step by step, as we did with the previous session, on how to get started with the node robot, basically. That's the Zero Robot we put in a Zero OS node. So remember that AOS 9 is certainly not something that you will want to start with. If you didn't do that until now, don't touch it. It's cool, it's nice, but the future is Zero Robot. Okay, now what are the installation options? Well, the story is quite simple. I could make all kinds of difficult stories here, but it's quite simple. If you are a developer and you tend to do a lot of things with JumpScale, probably most of you will want to do a lot with JumpScale. You will want to go for a full installation on your host or maybe in a Docker container, but most probably a full installation using the Bash utilities. And there you have the link. I have a separate slide also on it. Remember, that's again what I do. Always take both the development branch of the Bash repository and the development branch through an environment variable that you need to set then of the JumpScale environment. That's what you typically will do. Of course, it's supposed to work also with master. But then again, as a developer, that's probably what you, at this point, what you will want to do together with us, is go for development branch. And then we have also the sandbox, the JumpScale sandbox. It's quite new. Quite new means, yeah, it's certainly not perfect. But for those that attended my previous session on JumpScale, no, on Zero OS, getting started with Zero OS, you will have seen that I only used the sandbox version of JumpScale. It was even a pre-release, and it worked fine. I didn't really have any problem with it, and I did quite advanced stuff during this session. So indeed, if you are a non-developer or you simply need quick access, you have some virtual machines somewhere in the field and you need quickly to set up a JumpScale environment in order to interact through JumpScale libraries and tools and what if, then indeed the sandbox is your friend. You basically have then two options to set it up. You can, well, what I did in the previous session, I set it up using what we call the Z bundle on an Ubuntu machine or a Mac machine, and that's what we support today. Or the other option, which we will also cover today, and that's quite cool, and that's where you will want to go more and more, is simply install the sandbox as a container on a ZeroS node. In a production environment, you will most probably do that through a template or through a blueprint that you send to the Zero Robot, and the Zero Robot will then most probably put the container on top of a VM. I'll come back on that on the node. In this session, however, we will actually do a little bit the same as what we did the previous time, namely we have a ZeroS node, and on the ZeroS node we will directly put a container, in this case not a generic Ubuntu container, but a container which includes the JumpScale sandbox based on an F-list that has been reviewed and is about to be released on the hub for you to leverage. Okay. Okay. A few words in one slide about the option one. I mean, the full install on the host or on a Docker container. So for development purposes, go to that link, and basically the most important commands to really install JumpScale are on the screen. As you can see, you need sudo access. Remember that, it will not work otherwise. You need to go to the bash repository and you take the development branch, you get the install script and you execute it. Once executed, you need to update or source this updated bash file. And then it's quite simple. You just need to export the version of JumpScale that you want to install, development or master at this point, and then you just have to execute this single command. If you want to do it on a Docker container, but let us be very clear, Docker containers are not so much used in this company at this moment, so they don't have as much attention as, for instance, ZeroS containers, but yes, you can do it. It's supported, it's documented, so I certainly invite you to try it. We even have Docker files if you want to use them, but once again, it's just best effort support that we provide there. That being said, it works, and some of you will want to use it in that way. Okay? Then if you want to do a sandbox installation, and here, Riem, I realized that we didn't really update the slides, because as you can see here, the URL of the F-list is still the URL of the F-list we used during the session that I did last week. We'll provide and we'll update the slides with the correct URL so that you know how to use it. It's about basically download the Z bundle, and through the Z bundle you then will launch a sandbox. You give it a name, a sandbox, and once you have it launched, you change the root so that your environment takes the sandbox as your environment, and you just make sure that this sandbox can go to the internet, and off you go, and you have a JumpScale 9 environment. I don't know, Riem, if you have something to add here.
Yeah, no, this is pretty cool. I can also show them how to do it on ZeroS if you guys want.
Yeah, that's certainly what you will see in the demo. So let's wait a little bit to the point where we will show you how to do it on a ZeroS, because that's what all of you will want to do, right? Okay. Now, it's an important slide. Maybe we should take more time with it in future sessions. And Riem knows it very well. I tend to be confused myself when I need to talk about tools, sols, prefab, clients. executors, it tends to become confusing, which it isn't, but okay, you need to learn about it. In general, we have three things. We have tools, we have sols, and we have clients. And there is some kind of overlapping. For instance, you have clients that might use things that are in the tools. You have sols that might use, you see, there is some overlapping. But in general, the story is easy. The concept tools, it's how it all started. Sols and tools, we needed to have a consistent framework for interacting with typically infrastructure, cloud infrastructure. Yeah, and this is typically about working with the file system, working with processes, with jobs. In this context, it's also working with F-lists. And you see, that is where the sol is all about. And then the tools, it is more like things that are like at a higher level. Sols typically are, but not exclusively, are typically for doing local stuff. You have JumpScale locally installed, and instead of doing things from Bash, you can go to the sol, the API, and get things done. But it's not exclusive to local access. You will see you could use it also for remote access, but natively it was really conceived for doing local stuff. The tools then includes all kinds of stuff that is at a higher level. If you want to do configuration management, you want to manage all kinds of nodes that are deployed on several cloud infrastructures and still have one single framework and API set to interact with the nodes and don't bother about where are they deployed, which SSH key was used. It becomes all very nice, consistent. Same thing with executors, we'll talk about it, allowing you to interact again both locally with something and remotely with something through the same API without having to bother about connectivity complexities. And prefab, again, I like this one a lot. This is really about making, installing, and configuring full packaged products easy without having to learn a lot about many things. And the clients, as the word it says, I think Git is a nice example. We have one for Git, we have one for Git. It's typically, again, a framework for interacting with these backend systems, leveraging the config manager, making it both secure and convenient to, for instance, authorize a join request of a zero-tier network. Remember in my last session, setting up a zero-tier network? And that's a good example, by the way, and I have it in my slides. Setting up a zero-tier network, I did do it through the command line. I didn't show you, but you could also set up the zero-tier, of course, through prefab model for zero-tier. And once you have set it up, you then use the client to, for instance, authorize a join request. So that's a nice example. I think the last one, Open vCloud, is the most well-known client and the most tested client available in JumpScale. It's basically the client we make available to interact with the cloud APIs or the cloud REST APIs of the Open vCloud environment for creating accounts, for creating cloud spaces, virtual data centers, and virtual machines. And we will cover, well, we used as a ZeroOS one last session. We'll come back to it today, of course. And some of the others will be introduced today, SSH key and SSH connection, let's say. It's all examples. Okay, so the sols, I tried together with Riem to come up with a simple definition. The sol is a system abstraction layer, that's the abbreviation, making it easy for developers to interact with system components, both locally and partly remotely. As I said, natively, most of it is really for doing local stuff, but over time you will have discovered that we introduced features to allow you to use the same source all of a sudden to interact with system components. It's mostly system components. Sol is typically not something you use to interact with the server or to set up a MongoDB or to set up a PostgreSQL. That's not what you will be using a sol for. Sol is really about system operations, really about infrastructure components that you will want to automate. Riem, maybe it's a good time to do a demo. What do you think? Should I give you the...
Yeah, sure.
So I stop sharing, and then I think I should make you the... How do I do that? Manage participants, so I can make you now the make the host. So you're the host. Do you want to chase? Yes. So
Okay.
feel free to take the screen and do the very first demo, and whatever you want to show.
All right. Let's. Okay. Well, so the sounds okay. What happened? Can you guys still hear me?
That's normal. It's like a network issue, if you ask me, because Riem isn't moving anymore. Yeah. Laptop crashed, really? This only happens once a year. Riem's laptop crashed. Okay, no issue. We'll wait until Riem recovers from the big crash. So I'll take over. This is so funny. Again, okay. Let me take back the screen. So share again my screen, and I'm not going to take the thunder of Riem, so I'm not going to do the demo specifically. But what she was about to show, it's pretty straightforward. It's like in JumpScale, and she was going to do that with the interactive shell. It's very, very basic. It was just going to write a file on a specific path. So you see here, you typically have a path with with two parts. She would concatenate the two and then use that path and write a file, hello world, and read the file. So it's really, really simple, nothing rocket science type of thing, but this, I think, shows exactly what it is. It is about providing an API for really basically even stupid things, you might say. Because what I heard many people telling me often is like, oh, many of these things are sometimes easier from the command line prompt than they are from JumpScale. Now, that's not to annoy you. That is simply because, yes, indeed, we want to provide a single consistent framework, API set, to get done anything. You should never end up in a situation where you can do very sophisticated things through JumpScale, and then you need to change a file or write a file and then say, okay, but that's something we do not automate. Riem, should I give you, or should I just continue? I think for now it's okay. Doing this demo was pretty simple. I'm not even going to take the effort to do it myself because this screen is pretty self-explanatory. So that's the idea of a SAL. I think in my previous slide, if you can see that if you type j.sal, you get a full list of many things. Now, I need to warn you, some of them are probably not being used since quite some time. I repeat what I said, that the whole JumpScale thing has been created more than 10 years ago, and some things were created back then because we needed, like Samba. You see the SAL for Samba. If you want to set up a Samba server, yes, and then interact with the Samba server, that's what you do to the Samba SAL. The same thing for Ubuntu, we have all kinds of things, or RouterOS. For those that know Open Cloud, you know that the way we implement networking is by leveraging RouterOS. The APIs of RouterOS, instead of forcing you to use them natively, we make them available to JumpScale. Open vSwitch is another important component. We have all these these interaction points. And that's the whole point, quite straightforward, nothing much to say about it. Now, prefab, let me explain again. It's about server installation and configuration without you needing to know much or almost nothing in most cases about what it takes to do a best practices based installation of that specific server. So it's basically wrapping everything, or typically wrapping best practices for doing exactly that. Of course, then again, let's be open and honest with each other. Some of the Python prefab modules have been written like, let's say, more than 1 year ago because we need it. And in the meantime, it's very possible that there is another new best practice, or that there is a new version with a new feature that we are not yet leveraging in a prefab module. Well, then again, yeah, then you are not you will not be happy. But the whole idea is that typically for supported installations, we will recommend you to use the prefab modules, because in the prefab modules we typically implement the way we think the installation of that module should be supported. And this is also a way for us to make sure that you end up with a well-supported environment. So remember that. Now, that being said, in general, I should not talk too much about it. The whole idea of a zero people cloud environment is that you will never have to do ad hoc configuration and server installations. The whole idea is that you just take well-tested images. In our case, that comes down to using F-lists. Remember that you need an F-list based on which you create a virtual machine, or indeed a container, and that you typically will not want to do configuration, ad hoc configuration through APIs or configuration files. You typically use F-lists. So just keep that in mind. But of course, in order to create the F-lists, in order to do the tests on the new F-list, you will most probably want to use JumpScale to do the tests, and especially if you want to do integration tests and if you want to do stress tests, these things can easily be automated through the JumpScale prefab modules. And that's how you should see them. Here you see the example I talked about. It requires me to introduce something that is at the end of the session, but then again, let me already talk about it here. Typically, prefab builds on top of the executor framework. Now, the executor framework, see my very last slide almost, it's about providing one single framework, one single thing, an executor we call it, to which you can execute commands, both locally and remotely. The point is, of course, especially when you want remote execution, you don't want to bother with all whatever connectivity information or complexities that are required to make it work. And an executor makes it transparent for you. So whenever you get an executor from, for instance, a container, and we have all kinds of things in JumpScale that allow you to take like a container, like a VM, and then you say, give me the executor for that thing. And then we have an executor for Docker, we have an executor on a SSH, and you are really shielded away from what is happening underneath. You have your executor. For instance, in this case, if you want to execute something locally, in my case, think of I'm on a node and I want to install zero tier. What you typically need is some executor. And in this case, it's one of the tools, executor local get. So it's basically get you the local executor. And once you have the local executor, you can create a prefab for it, a prefab interface for it. So you see, in order to get a prefab interface, you need to pass an executor, because prefab typically uses the SSH executor. And we have other executors that take other ways to communicate to the remote system. But from a prefab perspective, it's always just the same prefab. You just need an executor. You say which executor. And on the prefab level, you then can install whatever you want to install, server and configuration stuff, without having to bother about the underlying complexities. And from that point on, it's simple, like prefab network zero tier, installed, and then start the zero tier, start, simple. If you don't want to join, that's typically what we had to do also in the previous session. If you then want to join a specific overlay network based on a zero-tier ID, you then use the zero-tier, as you see it here, join_network. It's really simple to use. And the point is, of course, that we try to make it very consistent for whatever you want to achieve. For any component, any server component, we have the same easy to use model. Good. Well, yeah. What I was going to say, there is also a zero-tier client, and myself, I found it a little bit strange to discover, but in order then to, well, first of all, join a zero-tier network, myself, I was expecting that I could add through the zero-tier client, which is not the case. Just remember that. However, you will use a zero-tier client if you want to automate also the authorization of a join request. Yeah? So if you really need to do that through code, then you will need the zero-tier client. That's not something you do through prefab. Personally, I think they should also add it in the client. But okay, if you know it, it is just another line of code that you need to use. Then the config manager, the secure configuration management tool. I like it. Reem did put the title underneath it, and this indeed describes very well what it is. But there is one other word that I think should be added when you think about the config manager. It's convenience. It's really the combination of making sure that, that's my definition here, making sure that you can keep secret information private. But at the same time, make it for you convenient to leverage this secret connectivity information to connect to virtually any backend. So it's about providing you a convenient framework for both keeping the security information private and make it for you easy to connect. That's the whole idea. And the things like prefab, the things like the client factory that I will introduce in the next slide are all based on this config manager. So it's a very important point. In my previous session, I introduced you already to it without giving you a lot of explanation. We'll come back to it today. For now, let's have a look to the theory of it. And I think this slide tells it all. And some of you will know I like colors, and I cannot hide it. So that's my newest production. So I should maybe create a version of this slide that builds, because typically everything starts at the left side. You have a JumpScale environment in a sandbox or a full installation, and from that JumpScale environment, the client, you want to talk to a backend system. And what that backend system is, typically it is, in this context, typically a 0S node. But it could as well be an AWS virtual machine. It could be a blockchain. It could be a zero-tier network. It could be basically anything you can think of. Yeah, you typically need a client, like the example I just gave. Like you need to automate the join requests to a zero-tier network. So in order to do that, you need a client from within your JumpScale code to interact with that zero-tier network. Yeah. Now, this is based on this client factory. Now, before you use the client factory, it basically starts with configuring the config manager. And configuring the config manager comes down to, like, at some point in time, that is my backend system. Like, for instance, that is my 0S node. Okay. In order to connect that 0S node, you need to know a few things. As you saw in the last session, you need to know the IP address of that thing. Yeah. You need to know, most importantly, probably in that context, the JSON web token. Now, the JSON web token, that's really something you want to keep private. Yeah. Maybe the JSON web token, as I showed you in my demo last time, might be based on an app ID and secret that you also might want to put somewhere in the code. But if you want to put it somewhere in your client code, you will want to encrypt it. The config manager provides you the framework to keep this secret information secret and enable you in a convenient way to decrypt it and encrypt it with a key of choice. That's the config manager. The config manager, as you can see, will store this, what we call configuration data, in a repository. And each configuration instance is encrypted. Well, partly encrypted. Typically, the address of a 0S node might not be encrypted, but the password or the JSON web token, of course, is encrypted. Yeah, and this is done. It is an extensible framework. And that's not a part that we will cover today, but it's really easy to create your own schemes. You can create your own templates. It's really simple, but there's no use in covering it today. And based on this simple template, like 4 lines of code, you specify which of the fields should be encrypted when used. And then again, config manager knows what to do. You never have to bother much about how it works. Yeah? Now then, the real value is here. Eh? The real value is that this thing only needs to be done once, because a configuration repository is something that you even might push to your own private Git server, so that imagine that you set up another sandbox and that you have access to the key that was used for encryption. You can leverage the configuration repository from the sandbox by using your key and not having to bother about how the configuration was done. So the configuration of the config is typically something you do only once, especially from your workstation environment. You will, over time, have built a relatively big configuration repository, all protected with your private key. And from that repository, it becomes really easy to connect to whatever you have been connecting already before. That's the whole idea, because then it becomes like J clients, the name of your backend, like 0S, get, and then the instance name. That's it. If you, as I did in my previous demo, named one of your 0S nodes node 1, you say, get me node 1. That's it. Get me node 1. I don't need to know at that point in time what was the JWT, what was the address, what port was it listening. You don't need to remember that. You just need to remember, and basically even that you don't need to remember. You can say, list me all 0S nodes. And then you get a whole list of nodes. You say, okay, that node, connect me to it. And then the client factory then talks to the config manager and gets the de-encrypted connectivity information and connects for you to the backend. So it's a pretty simple story. And believe me, once you get to work with it, you get to appreciate it a lot, especially because it feels really secure. Huh? Okay. Here you see what I did last time through JumpScale code, and I included 3 slides further, the same JumpScale code again. But I've been thinking a lot, let's say, on if people start from scratch with config manager, what are the best steps to guide them through? Well, to be very honest with you, myself, I prefer to use JumpScale, of course. I prefer to use JumpScale, and again, it's in the slides, just wait 2 minutes. I prefer JumpScale to also do the full initialization of the config manager. Full, it's not difficult, because it all comes down to 3 things. You need to specify which SSH key that will be used by the config manager on that node, on that workstation, to encrypt all secret information. Here you see an example of how you could do that. It's pretty straightforward from Bash. This is standard stuff. Still, I wanted to document it just to show you, well, if you want to have, for the first time, a well-working environment, do it like this. Then you need to create a Git repository. Now, to be very clear with you, even that is not really necessary. The repository to store the config information and it should not be a Git repository, not necessarily. It could also be any directory on your system, yeah. That is a directory that is not being linked to a private Git server somewhere. It's very possible. In that case, you don't need to do Git init and stuff like that. But then again, This is what I typically recommend people doing. You give it a name. You typically put it in a directory structure that is like this. Without going into detail, the reason why it is, JumpScale has some logic, hard-coded logic, that enables it to find your config repository automatically. But then it needs to be in the path as you see it here, like the Git server under your code, under the specific code directory, yeah? Git server, account, and repo name. So that's typically how it needs to be there. So it's a Git repository, yeah? And then you initialize, and that's basically the only thing you need to do. This is really there's a lot of blah blah here, but it all comes down to this single line of code. You initialize a specific directory or Git repository with a specific key. And what will happen then as a result of that? You'll see two screens. The first screen, which I think is a bug, as discussed with Reem, but just remind that. If you just click OK. The screen is not a bug, but what I mean here, what you would expect in the first screen is indeed the name, the path of the SSH key you provided. What this basically does, it just allows you still to change the values you passed. So remember in my example, I passed a very specific config repo path and a key. Now, this key, the second argument I passed, is what you see here. You can still change it. You could still say, no, it's another path, it's another file, yeah? And the other screen, interactive screen, you will typically see is then basic information about yourself, your email address, full name, and login name. People sometimes ask me this login name. What login name is it? Is this my Git username? Is this my itsU.online username? Is it my Facebook username? It is whatever you choose. It's basically a free field. It's not really used actually in the system. And remember, it reveals again this thing about templates, about creating configuration templates. And you can create whatever template you want. Login name is, by coincidence, maybe an unused field that you might leverage or not from here. Just remember that. Don't panic when you see the screen. Oh, I don't know my login name. Yeah, full name, of course, you know. But don't bother. Put something there. It will not crash. It will not all of a sudden make things not work. So as a result, and you see it here, what it does, it will create two files. This file and the other file. And the first file is basically, both files are TOML files. And basically it's a human readable file that includes both public information and private information. Each time when you see an underscore at the end of a name, then you will see the value will appear there later, encrypted with the SSH key. By the way, this SSH key. For instance, this one, I'll have examples of it in my slide deck. This one also doesn't include any private information, but if you wanted it, the schema should have an underscore in the name. Yeah? Okay, these files are created. And then this is what I did in my last session. Again, a lot of blah blah here. Don't bother too much. The only relevant line is the last one. You have J, tools, of course, tools, config manager, init. You specify the data repository configuration, which I just put here. Remember here, that's my name, my login name. Very simple. Silent, I put to false. Well, what is that silent? If you put it to false, he will not be, let's say, smart. If you put it to true, it will try to figure out itself where the configuration directory is and which key to use. Now, in this case, of course, if I put it to false, which I think is the default, I'm not sure, it will anyhow take whatever you specified, what you specified here, the config path and the key, which are the exact same fields you pass from the command line. And here I specify the key, and here I show you, so in this example, it's about the key that already exists. You could create it, of course. We'll come back to that in one of the screens later. So it's pretty simple, and I repeat, that's what I prefer to do. a typical first usage to me when working with the config manager, because now you have an initialized config manager, the very first thing I typically do on an environment is make sure that I have my application ID and my secret from It's Your Online, that I have created a config instance for it, so that I can easily leverage it for instance, getting a JWT directly from JumpScale when I need to interact with a backend system that requires my JWT, for instance, claiming or asserting that I'm a member of a specific group, which is also in the slides. So a lot of code just to say, the last line again, you need to specify the configuration data, which is an application ID. And you see both are secret. So meaning you pass here in plain text the values, what I did in my demo session, which is never good because after the session I had to delete the session, the API key, of course, because otherwise you could use it and hack my my account on It's Your Online. But when you code it, you only need to do it once, and it gets encrypted in the configuration repository. Yeah. Now, it's a little bit strange. We have this argument we call location. Location, it's all related to how we work with the JS loader, one of the core components of JumpScale, for loading modules. And for every single module, especially when we talk about the client module, it should be found in how we organize code in a specific location, let's say. And a location is typically something like J clients, the name of the backend system. So if it's online, you put it like that. And typically you will see that the TOML files that get created, including the encrypted data, then go to the directory as you saw it in my previous slide. Instance, that is basically the name of the instance. So remember in the previous session, we created a configuration instance. We will do it again here for a specific node, 0S node. We could name it so that later on we just get the node by instance name. Now, what is so special about the It's You Online one? It's You Online is you can never create multiple instances for It's You Online. For It's You Online, you are only allowed to create one single instance, which is typically called main. And maybe you should correct me, Reem. I'm not really sure it needs to be called main. Is it?
It doesn't have to be called main. It can be called anything you want.
Okay. But indeed, for It's You Online, you can only create one. It's what they call single instance, right? Maybe you can comment on that, what the logic of this is?
So the idea is you only have one identity, which the It's You Online denotes. So sometimes there are some tools which so far we only use for your own configuration, which is the screen that Eve has shown, showing your email and your full name and your login, and for the It's You Online. So it's just a single config because it denotes your own identity. So you don't need more than one configuration. So this has a single instance, which means no matter what you call it, it's not going to matter. It's always going to touch the same instance that you configured just once.
Okay, that's important to know. So some of them might try to have multiple identities. I always wonder what you smoke then, but yeah, some have it. And then you might want to, well, this is certainly not supported here, only one identity. Of course, if you have multiple nodes, you will have multiple instances per node. For either, you could have even multiple instances for the same node if you want to. Now here you see a nice example. This is then the It's You Online data, which ends up in the TOML file. And here you see that I need to pass, and don't try it, it won't work, at creation time of the configuration instance, I need to pass the values in clear text here. Of course, I specified explicitly that I wanted to have them in interactive mode. You see here, interactive is true. Normally you put it not on true, you put it on false, and then the values would never show up on the screen. But for my slides, this was quite nice to use, because this really shows what data is getting encrypted and which not. A base URL, you might wonder, why would you want to change the base URL? Well, of course, you might want to use a private instance of It's You Online or the staging It's You Online server, and that's why you might want to change the base URL. Okay. Now the clients, and then remember the clients or the client factory and the configuration manager go hand in hand. You typically need the configuration manager in order to have the clients working. And how does it work? Okay, I need to fill that out, but that's for later. How does that work? I think it's best shown with examples. I already showed you it's your online client and 0S. We'll come back to it in a minute. We will discuss now two other clients, the SSH key and the SSH client. It's a bit strange name, but I'll explain to it. And then we will not go over it today, OpenVCloud client, which is of course a very well-known one, but the Zero Robot one is the one you will most probably be using a lot. And to be very honest also with you, I really look forward to the session of Friday, because we are still in a kind of a bootstrap situation. You know, you need to set up a 0S node, you need to do tricky stuff to get a JumpScale sandbox on it, and you need to do well, tricky stuff. Once you have a 0S node with a node robot running, you can basically interact with the system through Insomnia or whatever REST API user interface to get things done without having to do much, well, bootstrap things, as you will be seeing. Huh? Now, it's your line. Here, see it? The most important line is the second. Remember that I created an It's You Online configuration instance. Yeah? Once you have done that only once, you can simply get it by saying get that main instance. And remember, it could be any name that you gave it, but there is only one. And then you get the It's You Online client. Huh? The It's You Online client. Huh? And the It's You Online client is, of course, what you can see here in the last line, through which you then get things done. In this case, all this code, what is this code all about? This code is getting me a JSON web token, asserting that this user is part of this group. And the demo org is the demo org we set up in preparation to this session for the 0S node that Reem set up on Packet.net again. And I can connect to that server because I'm a member of that group. And by sending this JWT along with the connectivity interaction, I will get access. Huh? So here you see it. It's your online client. You just say the location. You say get which instance. In this case, well, there is only one. I even think that it would work without instance equal main in this case. But
it would, yes.
Yeah, is it?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, never tried it, but it makes sense, of course, in that context. Okay. Okay, this slide is not beautiful, but I wanted to show it anyway. It's a slide that did not really finish, but it's something that I wanted to put in slide because it shows what got me confused at some point in time. Sometimes it's confusing to see that you have a client and you have the config instance. Basically what you see, the client is what we just got. If you go in the client and you do .config, you get this, because the .config will then lead to the API you get to interact with the config instance. And for instance, it's not in the slides, but it's in the documentation that will be updating. There is, for instance, this data_set, which allows you, for instance, to at runtime change a configuration instance field, and only one field by doing that. So you could say it's your line client. Think, for instance, about this scenario with It's You Online, that you say, let me test it quickly with the staging server, and then let me set the data set with this field here, change it to work with the real server, and you change it there, things like that. Of course, this would not work because my identity on the staging would be different from the identity on the production, but you get the point. And you can easily change. It would make sense in context of connecting to an OpenVCloud environment, for instance, and that you would simply switch with one line of code the target system. Huh? Okay, this one is not new. This is one what we showed the last time. But here, again, I'm going to explain you something that I didn't explain until now. The normal way of working, you specify configuration data. Again, this is, again, with this underscore, I need to pass the JWT, the port and the address. And this is the address in the zero-tier overlay network, and the port is the default port here. Now, if you follow the story as I've been building it up until now, what you typically would do first, only once, you would, with one line of code, which is this one, you would configure a new configuration instance so that you can then later on do things like this line, get me the instance with that line. Huh? That's what you typically would do. Now, personally, I never do it like that. Or typically I use this one. Now, what is different with this one? Have a look. If you compare this line and this line, it's almost the same. The only difference is that I pass the data directly into the, as an argument into the get. What this does, it basically does all the rest. So this does the same as all these things. It actually, even if this instance node 1 already exists, it will override the configuration data with the data you just pass. Huh? So if the client already exists, you could do 0s.list, you get a full list and get the node 1, but you could still create one or override the data configuration like this. So this line is what typically is being used by most of us to get the client. But here you see typically the full logic. You have configuration data, you use a configure method to create an instance, configuration instance that you then can leverage typically with this line of code to create it. Or you could do it in one line like that, okay? Nothing special. Now, again, and here you see it what I didn't show yet. In this case, because the password is the name of the field as it was specified in the template for a 0s configuration instance. In that template, what we typically pass as the JSON web token is saved in a field we call password, and it's having the name underscore or the underscore at the end, meaning that JumpScale knows that when it receives the actual secret of the API key, in this case the full JWT, it needs to save it in an encrypted format. Another detail I should maybe put in the slides: if you did not pass a JWT, it would work too, by the way. Now, how can that work? Well, how does that work? In that case, JumpScale is smart enough and will check whether there is a configuration instance for its online. If it finds one, and it can only find one or none, if it finds one, it will take the app ID and secret from the encrypted store and will generate the JWT from there. That's the logic. To be honest, I don't think it will work because the member of will probably not be in the JWT. But for Open Cloud, it would have been working, right, Rien? So my logic is good, but
almost there. Yeah.
Almost there. Huh? But anyway, it's nice to see how things get stored on disk. And TOML, again, this is a human readable format. So meaning that if you go to the command line prompt and you do less or VM or whatever or nano or whatever you want to use, or notepad, you can edit the TOML file and change the fields as you want. Huh? Okay. Another thing that we introduced during the last session, but we didn't explain, is that we created this 0s client. That's what you have. What you see, the client. At some point of time, you have a client based on the code I should show you. But then still, we would go to this thing here, the SAL, the system abstraction layer, get node. What this does, as you can see here, when you go there, you can basically then call the get node and do other stuff like the 0DB or the 0Robot. What it actually provides you is a more specific API, which clearly is less generic than what you see here, because this could be for any client, but a very specific client API that allows you to interact with the specific things that are specific to, in this case, a 0s node. Yeah? So it provides me with an easier to use, cleaner interface to get, for instance, what we will do in the last session of Friday, to the 0Robot. For instance, what we will do on the next session on Thursday, and I'm personally looking forward a lot to this next session, you will be using this one, by the way, the 0s SAL get VM, for instance. We are working and releasing every moment now on a version of a SAL for working with what we call the primitives. Remember the very first slide of Christophe? The primitives like the VM and the gateway and the zero robot. Well, for these first two, well, exactly, we will start to create with VMs and with gateways, and that's what we will be working with next. Huh? Now, once you then use this get node, that's what I do here, get node, and you specify the name of the configuration instead of the node, you get where we actually want to be in the API that is really specific, not generic anymore, really specific to everything you need to interact with the 0S node. Huh? And that's what we used during my demo. Remember this node.name? I had some failures during my demo. They didn't work, and at the end it worked. We were happy. But here you can then like node, show me all the gateways. Node, show me all the containers. Get me the client object that is underneath. Find this, everything you typically, this is typically what you will want to play with when working with a node. And that's, again, part of the next session, the part 2 session on working with getting started with the 0S node. So leveraging JumpScale specifically to do low-level stuff on the 0S node. Not yet using the 0S node robot or the node robot, but really using the Git commands through the 0S client that is available in JumpScale. More specifically, the nodes API. Voila. Doesn't make sense to demo that. It's all very simple. We come very close now to Urim. You feel me coming? Here you see it. What I just explained in the previous slide. I get the node interface to the 0S client, to the 0S node, based on the node configuration. And that's then the config that I created in my, that's how we did it. Once you have that, as you can see in the third line, you can then, for instance, list all containers. And remember, if you would do that on a completely new container or a completely new node, you would see one container. And that is the node container or the node robot container. So every single node that you start, 0S node, will come with one container, which is the zero robot container, which is basically the default and only gateway that typically will listen on a public port of the node. What we are typically doing now, going in development mode, remember this %20 parameter development that allows me to talk directly to the allez, help me, the Git, no, the Git, the Jesus, the allez.
REST API.
The REST API, exactly, sorry. That's what you do now. Now, in Evo, what we do, we specify a list, and here you see it, or F list, and see the F list this time is not the same as the one we used during the demo. And in my slides here, I still have the one that my friend here created. This is the new one. This will become the official one. This is an F list that is not just including a JumpScale sandbox, it also includes the things I had to do manually. Remember in my last session that I had to then I had to install still the SSH daemon and stuff like that. In this F list, it's all already done. So it becomes even easier. I specify the name of the container. I specify the F list. I give it a host name so that I can then use. And then here, we'll come back on it because this will become a very interesting topic. This is like one line, but this can contain so much sophisticated information about the exact network, software-defined network configuration you want. People that have been following sessions in the past about the orchestrator and the Zero Gateway, they remember these really cool sessions about how to configure a gateway. We'll come back to that soon. Through an even nicer user interface, but the most basic configuration is this one, type default. Then you will basically have a bridge, in this case from the container directly to the public network interface of and exposing a port forward on a port. Yeah. Voila. Here you see, by the way, the same line. If you already did this once, you can get to it like that. And once you have that, the real magic starts. And remember this slide, I'm just going to build it again. That's what we did last time, right? Now, what we do now, and then it's almost Riem's part to do it, this green box here, container, so the one that we are creating now is based, see, it's yellow now, I changed color, and it's not just a container, it is a container, yes, but it's a container based on an F-list for JumpScale sandbox. So basically, we are now creating the same thing as what I had where I started from in the previous session, and we create a new sandbox. And of course, then the story is you go in that sandbox, and then the bootstrap is done, and you start doing things from the sandbox. Okay, this is not what I'm going to show, but anyway, before I give it to you, Riem, this slide is not complete. What I wanted to show, but it's all for next sessions, is that in the production environment, what you would rather do, these boxes here, these yellow boxes are still containers, but what you would typically do, containers that are created for customers would never be running directly on the ZeroOS node. They would always be running in a virtual machine hosting that container. So you would be creating virtual machines for customers, and then and it could even be a Kubernetes cluster, but the containers would be running on top of these virtual machines. And they would go, or they would be made available on the network through gateways, and you would be creating gateways, specific network configurations, so that customers can go through, well, it's not yet complete, that they can go through, as you can see here, whatever network configuration you have, go to the specific gateway, and then go to the specific container. That's the way you will be working. And even from your own sandbox, you would still be able to interact, but only through the REST API. And I should add a line here so that customers also could go through the REST API. Huh? But it's for the future. It's just to put. Okay, Riem, what do you think? Will you explain now the JumpScale client and do a demo? Would that be good? Because I've been talking so much.
Yeah, sure.
What do
let's hope Zoom doesn't crash my laptop again. But yeah, let's hope so.
Okay. Let me just. Yeah. Good. Let me stop sharing, and I'll give you the screen now. So basically, you are now to talk about two other clients. That is the SSH key client and the SSH connection client, and then we do a demo on the sandbox. Riem, I'll let you do it.
Okay. Well, بتابي بوز من
Okay. That is strange. Riem's screen is again freezing. It's Riem's lucky day today, right? Oh, what a pity. Yeah, Zoom hates me, she says. Okay, no issue. It's what happens, right? So I'll have to share my screen again, like before. There we go. It's really a pity. I'm sure Riem will be joining us again. Okay. Good. Now, let me take over again, and I'll make it as simple as possible. So we have been discussing a few clients, a client for Zero OS, a client for Institute Online, and now I'm going to introduce two other clients, which are pretty important. The first one is the client for an SSH key, yeah? And the other one is a client for an SSH connection. I stress that explicitly because from experience myself, I got confused by it. There is clearly a difference between an SSH key and a connection based on an SSH key. Yeah? The first is the SSH key. The idea is that at some point in time, you already have an SSH key.
Sorry, Zoom keeps crashing my laptop. Yeah. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, the good thing is, Reem, we'll do another session that will be fully demo next week, I guess, and people will even
but I have everything set up.
So let's not feel bad about it. That's life. So, but feel free to interrupt me. So the first is when you typically have an existing key or you need to create a new one. For instance, what you see on your screen here is that we use the JClient's SSH key location, let's call it, to generate a new key. In this case, okay, it's a bit a strange key. Whatever, I give it this specific key name, my test key 1, and I put it a lot of code just to put it in a very specific directory, which is the .ssh of the home of my home directory, and there it puts it. The real code is here. You basically create a new key, and why would you do that? You would do that, for instance, when, initializing the configuration manager, and at that point in time, you need to specify to the configuration manager which key, and of course, that is a key that you need to protect and save, because otherwise you cannot do anything anymore with the config manager, to encrypt all secret data. Good. And then this line is just for you then to list all your SSH keys. Well, just remember, on the system itself, you might have 10 SSH keys in this .ssh directory, but the list will only list the SSH keys for which you created a configuration instance. Now, the different thing is that, remember my code, that you typically did J tools config manager and then configure. You could still do that also for an SSH key. But in this case, it's interesting to know that if you generate a key like this, it will automatically not just create a key, but it will automatically create an instance with this name for this key in the list. So these are all shortcuts that you will come to appreciate once you start working with it, that you not always need to go through the full configure method to get things done. You can easily do things like that. Now,
if I may interrupt also,
yes, please.
There's another, so if you already have an SSH key on your system and it's under your home.ssh, and you just say j.clients.ssh key.get of the name, making the instance the name of the key, it will fill in all the information for you out of the box, and it will try to, as much as possible, to figure it out. So if it exists in the location where JumpScale expects your key to exist, it will automatically create a key for you without asking, so that your development goes a lot faster.
Okay, cool. That's certainly something we need to add in the slides. I think it's always good that you know how things work, and then you know there are things that make it easier for you. Just know that and that's what you will most of the time leverage. I didn't know. Thank you, Reem. Next one, you see the slides were not ready, but here you see an example. Actually, of what I was explaining. Here I say J clients SSH get, and normally the line ends here. All the rest should not be in it. Where you say I get example client, whatever name you gave to the SSH key configuration instance. As a result, for instance, of the previous slide, it should then say, in this case, the my test key 1, and you would then say get. No, that's not true. Get an Let me be very clear. Rewind. I'm trying to say too much at the same time. Sorry. What I'm trying to explain with this slide is something completely different, but it's very related. Let me explain. So this is about the JumpScale client, not for an SSH key, but it's the JumpScale client for SSH. And most probably it's one of the most powerful clients. Why? Because if you did create a VM on Azure, you did create a VM on OpenVCloud, on whatever you choose, and you may, or ZeroS, of course, think about, and that's basically the demo we have prepared for you. Think about the container that we created last time, and you exposed the SSH daemon on a public zero-tier port, yeah? Then you could use this line by saying, get me a client for an SSH, I put it here in between, connection. So what this provides you is basically, and that's very important in order to introduce the concepts that will follow, it provides you then an SSH connection and a configuration instance that gets nicely, securely saved in the repository that connects basically your system with the other system. And in this case, this is a special one because we immediately pass all the data, like the zero-tier address, in this case of the container, the root user, the SSH key, and this is important. This SSH key is not the encryption key. It's not the key that is used for encrypting the data, because that's something the config manager knows itself. This is the key that that needs to be in the authorized users on the other side in order for me to have this working. And remember in the demo that we did last time, through some code, I did update the authorized user file, making it include my personal public key. Yeah? What you typically would have done is you would make sure that this public key or private key is loaded in your SSH agent, and by specify the name of that public that key, you would then end up with an SSH client that is easy to reuse. So this line of code you only need to write once to connect to it, because in the past you can then do get just instance 9, and then based on that you could immediately use this code, like is it connected, is it active, and this is then quite powerful. Execute whatever bash command to it. In this case, host name, get me the host name. So this is like a power line in a way. So with this, and I could split it up in multiple other lines, but with this single line of code, you basically create a configuration instance, which also ends up in a TOML file in a specific location that basically remembers a connection to a node based on an SSH key with a specific address and so on. Once you have that, you can easily connect. Huh? Something to add here, Reem? I don't know.
You can also do an SSH connection with a username and a password instead of an SSH key. Of course, if you do that, you have to have your SSH agent on your the other side, the remote server, accept username and password connections and have those username and passwords known to you. So there's a way where you can even automate allowing your authorizing your SSH key into there by first connecting with the username and password and saying, okay, now authorize my key. So that will be done for you if you already have login information using the username and password. So there's a lot of tools on how to get an SSH connection, and at the end of the day, it abstracts completely the idea of what a node is to you. So it could be any node that's deployed anywhere, and you can have the same connection to it always. Not the same, I mean, the same kind of connection, which means all your development will always stay relatively the same, regardless of the infrastructure underneath it. That's the whole idea.
Okay, cool. Okay. Now, why are we showing all this? There is a context. Okay, I was planning to remove this slide, so I will skip it because it doesn't add value here. There's typically some comments that you could send over to the container related to this authorized keys thing. And remember that I typically would want to have my personal key over there in authorized keys. And still, you still might need to start the SSH daemon, or you might need to generate.
No, you would have to, because it's a sandbox, and the sandbox doesn't have a a system CTL or something to start it for you. So what you'll have to do if you want to SSH into it, you'll have to do some these steps basically.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, you can SSH into the sandbox and use it as if it's local.
It's quite important. Remember in the previous slide session, we even had more. We also had to install the daemon. That's not needed anymore. That's already included in the F list. These things are still for you to do. So I should not even remove it, but make sure that it's well explained. Now, it gets even more interesting once you understood all this and started to work with SSH client and SSH key and config manager. It becomes really convenient thanks to the executor and the node manager. Now, the node manager, as you can see, I don't have a definition yet, but the node manager is typically this construct in JumpScale through which you then easily can list all the nodes. You don't even have to go through anymore the SSH connections or the SSH or the node clients or whatever. You just go to the node list and get things done with it. Now, let me try to explain and correct me if I'm wrong here, Riem. But we do here two things. The first line is about clearly getting an SSH connection client. That is what it is. In order to do so, yes, in order to do so, you typically only need to specify the instance name. Now, in this case, the instance name, the instance was not yet created. So in one line, we pass the configuration instance data in the same line. So this is what we typically do in real life. We do it in one line. We specify the address of the, in this case, the JumpScale sandbox container running on the 0S node on packet.net. Yeah, and here important, I specify the SSH key of which the private part of the key is on this machine from which I call it, because the public part of the key is in the authorized key, thanks to the previous screen of the container. Yeah, so I end up here because of this with a configuration instance for an SSH connection to that system, and then I do something extra. I then even create a node instance or in the node manager. And how does that work? Again, you give it a name, an instance name, I think we should call it.
Yeah, so this is the instance, yes.
Yeah, and here you just... Yeah, go ahead, you can take over, no problem.
So if you just pass the SSH client to it, it will infer all the data from the SSH client and will always connect using this SSH information. Now, this is very, very useful if you have multiple nodes on Open vCloud, on Kubernetes, on Docker, on 0S, whatever. That means that from your own host, you can just connect to any of these directly without having to remember any of the information about them except their name. So it abstracts completely what the node is, and it's just, you can use the command line tool, say JS9 node, SSH, which was going to be my demo, into, for instance, in this case, my sandbox directly, without ever having to redo any connections or whatever. It will always do it for you, and it will just be right there.
Yeah. We for sure need to do a demo on this and we'll come back on it.
Yep.
And I realize that some of you are not completely following anymore, but this is really powerful. This is where things really come nicely together. And I think the example you gave is excellent. In a real life situation, you have containers, nodes on multiple places, multiple underlying technologies, connections, whatever. At the end, from your environment, you have the node manager, and through the node manager, you can transparently connect to any of these systems as if they were just all running in VirtualBox on your machine, for instance. Huh? And here's the example. This is a duplicate slide. That's what we didn't finish, but it's probably what we then wanted to show you. This is what you then would execute at the command line. You could say at the command line JS9 node, list me all the nodes. And then you would end up even with nodes that are running on the local Docker engine, and some nodes that are on OpenV Cloud, and some nodes that are actually running on a 0S in Spain. And they all would just nicely be listed in one single list as if they were all the same. The second line, also to be executed from a command line, this was actually the demo which we prepared, then allows you, and of course you could also do SSH, root, add, but then again you need to remember passwords and IP address. No, you say just JS9 SSH into this instance. So with this line, and you should not even know whether this is a Docker container or a 0S container, locally or remotely, whatever. You just one line and you SSH up in a secure and convenient way into that system. This other one, that's another example. That's what the developers use a lot here internally. They create very often VMs and nodes and things like that to test stuff. Of course, what they then need to do is copy over code over there. And this single line of code, if I remember correctly, will then take your code repository or your code directory structure and sync it fully to the other side. Bidirectional even, I think. So this, yeah, no?
It's alright now. So basically, it makes sure your own host has so you develop directly on your machine, and everything you do is mirrored into your remote machine, which is very, very useful if you're developing remotely.
Yeah. And this is just one of the examples where indeed the JumpScale environment, in a secure way, it makes things really convenient for both system administrators and developers, right? The executors, and we are almost there, it's almost the end of the session. It all comes nicely together again. What is an executor? It's a concept, and the word tells it clearly, it's an executor. It's something you can talk to execute something. But again, depending on where the thing is running, what technology is being used, the way you have to tell that thing to execute something is typically different. Again, what we provide with the executor, which is also part of the core tools, with the executor is a way for you to execute any remote command, yeah, and make it as simple as executing the same thing locally. Yeah? And I already gave it in the example in the beginning. Remember, when I had to create a prefab object, yeah, for instance, to deploy a zero-tier, remember that was the example, the zero-tier software, I first had to have an executor. In my example, I took the executor of my local system, yeah, and then I said, create a prefab object based on that executor and installed zero-tier. In the example which we prepared here, we do the different thing, and it's very simple. We use, again, JTools executor, and this time we don't get the local one, we get one based on an SSH client. So in this case, Riem, what she actually also prepared, she created several extra machines on Packer.net. Not even running 0S, I think. It's not even important. She created...
It's not running, it's just an empty container.
Yeah. Something. Yeah? And then she created an SSH client to that machine. It could be an instance, as they call it at Amazon, running in their cloud. You just have created an SSH client for it. And then you do this with one line and you get an executor object. Meaning that with one line I can then install like at your service, or I could install JumpScale over there. I could install Drupal over there, or everything related to Drupal. And Drupal is a good example, or WHMCS, whatever you would like to. I'm trying to come up with fairly sophisticated examples that would require a lot of knowledge and experience and best practice to end up with a nicely supported environment. But basically with 2 lines of code, you end up with a fully supported, well-configured environment that is available through Node Manager, and in this case the execute. In this case, what we do, we then get the prefab on SSH, and remember that underlying connectivity could be something different. That's again the story. You could get an executor here based on an SSH client, but we could also create an executor based on other objects. But that's of course the most used one. And then we have this prefab object, and here a very simple example. We just again run a command to get the host name. Or here the same thing, but for doing it locally. Just to show you that this and this, it's the same line of code. The last line and this line is the same. So this shows that it's virtually the same. Doing it locally or doing it remotely is exactly the same code that you need to run. Okay, sorry, Reem, I've been talking too much.
Thank you.
Maybe we didn't do the demos we wanted to do, but on the other hand, I feel quite good about it because I feel that there's so much to cover, and I think it's very useful to do a full demo session about everything we learned, meaning that we will make the slides even better and more complete. So, and the demos will follow. So what we discussed, where are we? So we discussed the It's Your Online client, the 0S client. You learned about SSH keys, about SSH connections and the clients to it, how to work with that. And then based on that, you then could do PowerShell stuff. Now, next Friday, this Friday, and that's not the next session because there's a session in between about the primitives, the solve for the primitives. We will talk about a client for Zero Robot. So that's the one we didn't cover yet. And I repeat what I said already multiple times. Typically, that will be your real gateway to talk to what happens on a zero node, both directly through what I love to do, showing it through Insomnia, because it's just about simple REST API calls. But of course, we have a rich client, the Zero Robot client, that is very easy to use, just as what you had with OpenV Cloud. So basically, for those that followed the sessions in the past, remember the whole orchestrator stuff that enabled you to do whatever you wanted to do, create virtual data centers with software-defined networks, with VMs, containers. You would do that through the orchestrator API. The orchestrator is not there anymore, by the way. Also, the orchestrator got replaced by Zero Robot. And the REST API that you learned about back then got much more mature and reviewed and are now available on Zero Robot. And that will be something we will introduce to do on Friday. Okay. To end the session, this recording, of course, will become available on the YouTube channel. There is the link. The previous session is there already. This session of our best friend ZeroS Node Robot done by Christophe. For those that wanted to be as prepared as possible for the session of Friday, I recommend watching Christophe's session. It is an excellent introduction to what we will show you on Friday. And the session of today will also be there. And the session of Thursday, I forgot, that's not, Thursday will be the name of the session. It will not be the name of the session. The name of the session is part 2, basically, of getting started with Zero OS. It's basically about using the more sophisticated primitive solves to get things done directly on a machine. And the link on Zoom will also be available. Here again, the same thing. Previous slides, next slides, all will be. So next. So this is an old slide. This is Friday, Thursday. That's correct. Oh, sorry, it's correct. So also next week we have a session, only one, because it's a special week. Some people have holidays. We have one session on performance and stability, and the week after, so it's in 2 weeks. So we still have 2 sessions to go. This week, 1 session next week, and then the week after we have part 2 of this session, and part 2 of of part 3 basically of the session that I will do on Thursday. Now we still need to agree, Reem, when we do the demo. This could be the demo. We'll check together when would be the best timing. Maybe already next week. We'll see whenever fits. I'm certainly available next week if you want to, and we'll see. No hurry, I think. Good. Voila. This is the first time I mentioned this on a slide because I discovered it myself quite late. This is the public invitation that you can click to go to the ZOS Telegram group. So it's a public Telegram group. Some of you are already on it. So if you want to ask questions, public question related to ZOS, next to the other Telegram groups like the ERP program and the farmer group, this one is the one you will want to use. Voila. I would say Riem is still here. Let's use Riem. If you have pretty difficult questions, for sure, Riem will be able to answer them. Voila. The floor is all yours, my friends. What are your questions? There should be one question, right?
I'm glad that no one has questions. It seems like we were very clear and not at all confusing.
Yeah. Leslie, it's not possible that you don't have questions. And Eric, you have questions. I see you have questions. You start to laugh. Let's wait. Eric?
No, I don't have a question, but as you know, you have proposed a lot of information, so it's quite difficult to digest all at these moments and say, I make you a question, because most of the things, even that I already know some of the things you showed with us today. Okay, some of the things you need to sit down on the computer and just start playing, because it's the only way I can say, hey, I have a doubt here because I don't understand this name, I don't understand these methods, I don't understand what this does. So, okay, I need to sit down, and at that moment I will start having questions for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. JumpScale is best learned by playing around with it. It's a very big framework to just explain in one session. That's absolutely true.
Yes. So leverage the Telegram group for it, so that you all can answer.
Anytime.
Yeah. Leslie, I see you laughing. You have a question, right?
No, for me, no.
Man, it's still complex, eh?
It's a lot easier than it used to be, so we're doing the right thing here, I think.
But I need to check. Need to dig into it, eh?
Yeah. Anytime you want to send me an invitation to South Africa so I can explain it, just do that.
Eric.
For sure.
Yes.
Yes.
No. I mean Eric from Uganda, my friend.
Sorry.
No. How was it good? Did you have questions? Probably you have. Eric, still there? He's not, I think.
Seems not.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Riem, for supporting me. Would never have been possible without you. I have so much to thank you. So thank you very much. And see you soon on Thursday and Friday for the next session. Bye, guys.
Okay, thanks, Yves, and thanks, Riem, for sharing your wisdom.
Anytime. Bye.
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 Anyway, bye-bye.